Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of The Family Business, where I am thrilled to announce I have invited on Jonas Funk to be on the show. Jonas, thanks so much for coming on. I'm looking forward to talking to you.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, Matt.
So, the best way to start is to give people a bit of a snapshot of where you're working and what you do, a minute or so, and then we can delve into the fun stuff about how you got there, but at least people have some context of who you are.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. I'm Jonas Funk. I'm a partner at LEK Consulting in our Chicago office, and up until very recently led our U.S. healthcare sector for LEK. And as of January 1st, I handed the baton on to some other colleagues to head up the sector, and now I'm as I like to say, a regular partner who's focusing on good old-fashioned client work and team building and all the stuff that I've enjoyed for the last 25 years. And I spend all of my time in what we call the medtech space, as well as some areas outside of medtech, but still in healthcare.
Perfect. He's being a bit humble, everybody. Jonas has some significant reach into our space in medtech, so we'll delve into it in addition to some of his family stuff. So what I always like to kind of get started with is how much of this was intentional. So, you grew up in Portland, Oregon, correct?
I did, yeah.
Okay. And so I spent a little time out there and loved it. Went to Mother's for breakfast and did the food trucks and then did the whole wine country area and loved every bit of it. But what brought you all the way to Minnesota to go to school?
Well, I think like a lot of things in life, it was somewhat kind of happenstance, but it turned out pretty well for me. In retrospect, I think I went to a small liberal arts college called Carleton, which I'll say stumbled upon in my high school, college, kind of scouting, and I kind of liked it from afar, and I turned out to accept it, and really enjoyed my 4 years there. Made some incredibly close friends. Had a great experience with my schoolwork. I was an economics major. And ultimately that kind of, step into the Midwest, into Minneapolis or to Minnesota kind of was a nice entry point for me to spend, a good portion of my life thereafter in Chicago, where I joined a management consulting firm, LEK Consulting, back in 1997. And 25 years later, I'm still here, more or less. So that was kind of the short version, Matt, of how I ended up in Minnesota and then on to Chicago and LEK.
So was the medtech part of it intentional? Were you, like me, a kind of
No,
frustrated wannabe doctor, and this is your way of participating?
no, it too was a very kind of happenstance kind of result. During my early years at LEK back in the late 90s, did a number of projects for some of the big Chicago area medtechs like Baxter. So got a little bit of exposure to the medtech world in my first couple of years, but by no means was focused on that or kind of knew that that's where I'd spend most of my future career. It wasn't until kind of the early 2000s, when roll the clock forward, I found myself out in Tokyo, Japan, where I was intending to be for 6 months to beef up my business school application with some for some international experience. Got out to Japan, was supposed to be there for 6 months, ended up sticking around and started a company in Tokyo with another former LEK friend of mine, and that company became ultimately the LEK office in Japan. And early on in that kind of adventure, I'll say, we discovered that it helped to be focused on something, and pretty quickly we kind of filter down into a med tech focus, which turned out to be, I'd say, a good call in retrospect, because there was a lot of U.S.-based med techs that were trying to, do well in Japan, but were having a really hard time doing it. And so we're relatively receptive to external support and consultants, even if they were, relatively young and still kind of figuring things out themselves. And again, this was back in the early 2000s when Japan was a pretty important market for a lot of med techs, particularly from a profitability standpoint. So we found ourselves working with many of the large med techs pretty quickly as we founded and ultimately expanded that Tokyo office.
So it's an interesting case study on the importance of making sure whenever you leave or separate from a company that you do it on great terms, because look at the result by you keeping the LEK relationship. They want to buy in your office. I mean, how did that all work out? I'm
Yep.
curious how that all transpired.
Yeah, well, I mean, yes, I would say generally good to be a good person and keep relationships with people that you've worked with along the way. For me, personally, one of my mentors from my original Chicago LEK days was a fellow named Stuart Jackson, who just happened to be, the head of the Chicago office, then the head of the U.S. region, and then ultimately the head of the global partnership at LEK. And along the way, with his mentorship, there was kind of a particularly kind of easy path to kind of reconnect with the LEK mothership along the way. And when LEK didn't have an office in Japan, and we were kind of starting to build that, it turned out to be a very good win-win for us, entrepreneurs starting an office in Tokyo, along with LEK that was looking to have a place that they could serve clients with global needs and needing kind of a place in Japan too. So it was a good kind of win-win in terms of reconnecting with LEK. But to your point, generally a good thing to stay close and keep in touch and have good relationships with people that you're working with, because who knows where that will take you.
I was going to say it's a little more than that, because sometimes it circles back around in those kind of scenarios. I mean, that's a big jump from grabbing a beer with somebody to someone buying your company and you going back to work for them. I mean, that's not the norm. Now, I'm curious about the Japan piece. Everyone who I know that goes there or lives there seems to truly enjoy it. But I'm curious for you, what is it that you fell in love with it? What is it about it that was so attractive?
Yeah, well, I will say that it was not a bed of roses for me. It was a hard 6 years that I was out in Japan. I was also not expecting to be there for 6 years. I was expecting to be there for 6 months. So for me personally, there was a little bit of I was always kind of looking to get back home to the US. And in retrospect, I wish I had a longer term mentality so that I could have learned the language better and really kind of embrace the culture more versus feeling like I had one foot out the door, which was unfortunately the case. And as I mentioned, the whole reason I went to Japan was to get into business school. Well, I got into business school and I ended up deferring it a couple of times and ultimately didn't even go to business school because I was kind of feeling like I was learning a lot in terms of starting up a company and, in many ways, running a small consulting firm in Tokyo. It felt like a pretty big opportunity cost to walk away from that to go back to business school. But it was hard. It was hard. It was hard for multiple reasons. There was on a personal level, my family was all back in the States. I didn't speak Japanese very well. I, didn't really have kind of an a priori love of the culture that kind of brought me there in the first place. And it is a pretty alienating place, to be honest. It's hard to really kind of feel like you're home there. So it was difficult, but and also the work itself was in many ways quite challenging. And I'll also say that my business partner and once friend of mine did have a bit of a falling out, which was also kind of added to the stress. But I will say that the experience overall was very rewarding in terms of I quickly learned how to I think foster a culture of collegiality, support, entrepreneurial, kind of a sense of entrepreneurialism. So we had a lot of really cool things that we were doing, both in terms of working with clients, but also just building up our small little company that started off as, 2 or 3 of us and turned into, 20 some people by the time I left. And so that was pretty neat to see our company go from being a no name to being a pretty strong brand in the med tech community in Tokyo, with a very kind of passionate following of staff. So that kind of gave me maybe my first foray into leadership and managing people. So it was in many ways a very educational experience for me.
Okay.
Which I then applied in future future contexts.
So you were waiting to come back for 6 years. I'm curious, that first week you were back, did you go get a hot dog? Like, what did you do to feel like you were back home?
Well, I did spend about 3 months traveling around the world as a
Oh, really?
as a start. Yeah. And
Where'd you go?
I went a lot of places, Matt. I covered a lot of ground. Too much. In retrospect, I was, maybe too focused on checking off boxes and saying that I've been to places and seeing certain sites versus really, smelling the roses, so to speak. But I covered a lot of ground, couple dozen countries over
Ah,
multiple continents. But it was kind of my way to kind of, finish my foreign travels before landing back home. And frankly, when I got back home, this was, around 2007. There was all sorts of kind of challenges waiting for me that I wasn't expecting. So first of all, when I got back to LEK's West Coast, where I thought I wanted to be because that's where my family was, I quickly discovered that the med tech part of LEK was not really where I landed. And so I was suddenly not doing med tech, which was feeling a little bit like, I kind of felt like I was not doing what I was supposed to be doing. And then on top of that, the 2000 kind of 2008 kind of 2009, Lehman Brothers, Great Recession. So all of a sudden there was like not only not enough med tech for me to do, but not enough work period to do. So I found myself kind of a little bit lost, to be honest, when I was kind of first re-engaged in our West Coast offices. And it wasn't until I transferred back to Chicago back in winter of 2009, and kind of re-engaged kind of back with, some of my previous mentors and got back into med tech, where I really started to, I'd say, flourish, again.
yeah, flourish is an understatement. Now you have a mentor that most people know, and I'm curious about how this relationship started. You had mentioned that Bill Hawkins is someone that you respect immensely and that you have a good relationship with. How did that all begin?
Well, he came a little bit further down the path, but he is one of a handful of individuals who I consider to be a friend, a mentor, and someone who has been particularly special in providing, I'll say, external support, validation, and he's kind of, in many ways, a bit of a cheerleader for I'll say kind of LEK, but even more specifically for our med tech practice, and maybe even for myself personally. So early days, when I was back in Chicago in kind of 2009, 2010, I was trying to take on the leadership of the med tech practice, which was starting to get a little bit of critical mass. And with my kind of focus, and when I became a partner in 2012, we had enough critical mass to turn it into a proper med tech practice, where we started, recruiting dedicated staff members and started to have partners that were focused entirely on med tech. So that was kind of the beginning of kind of the formal practice within LEK. And this is kind of parallel to a general industry sectorization story, right? Across the consulting industry, there was more and more specialization and more kind of verticals that were being created. But within LEK, the medtech practice was kind of getting off the ground and developing expertise and depth and relationships that were frankly kind of punching above our weight, as we sometimes would say. And people like Bill Hawkins and Paul LaViolette and Rick Anderson, to name just a handful,
That's a
or
handful,
individuals. Sorry?
I said that's a handful. Those are three of the more powerful voices in the entire industry.
Well, it's I often wonder kind of how I and we have been lucky to kind of get connected to these individuals who are not just in many ways industry titans, but they're genuinely good, gracious, supportive human beings who I'm incredibly kind of indebted to. And so as we started to kind of build our practice and build some pretty cool IP and build a really great team, I started inviting people like Bill and Paul and Rick to come to our kind of our annual med tech summits and share with them the cool stuff that we're doing and share with them the really great team members that we had. And I think it was just a really powerful way for them to see kind of indeed how we were really doing some great work. Our team was really dealing with some kind of complex strategic issues that were really kind of tip of the spear in the industry. And so I think it kind of created this like gravitation towards us, and we started to get a lot of really neat people being part of our broader orbit. And I like to believe that I kind of help connect the dots a little bit and make some of that happen.
It's not an accident, Jonas. It doesn't.
But
That's not the way this
truly,
works.
but truly, I'm surrounded by some incredibly talented people. I'll just name a few names: Monish Rajpal, Ilya Trachtenberg, and Sheila Shah are the other three medtech partners who I work with here in the U.S. But we've also got medtech partners in Europe and Asia, and all of this wouldn't be possible without Stuart Jackson, who kind of not only kind of mentored me along the way, but also at some point was leading the med tech practice in its kind of early infancy days too. So I put some of the things together, but there was a lot of infrastructure and kind of people that made it possible for me to take that relatively nascent practice and I will say kind of turn it into what has become, I think, one of the most respected brands, doing some of the best work with some of the strongest dedicated team members in the industry.
Yeah, well,
we all feel very proud of, and maybe you can sense that, but we all share a lot of passion for what we do, and part of that passion is the work and the clients that we support, but a lot of it really is watching some of our team members grow and turn into partners and principals and managers along the way, which is really
I know Sheila Shah, and she speaks about you with reverence, just as a human being as well as a professional. And you're kind to share all of the credit, but it takes a hub to make a wheel, and so there is this leadership that you do that's somewhat of a softer approach, where you just have people that can come to you and you seem just like an open book. And I don't know if that's the Portland in you, because most people from out there are pretty easygoing, but you seem to have this way about you. Now, I'm curious, where in all of this does your family come into play? Because you have two kids, one's 3 and one's about a year. So
yeah.
When did your other half and your kids come into the picture with all this? And then we're going to tie these all together on how your career was involved in all of those decisions.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an important detail
Yeah.
to bring in too. So my wife is Japanese.
Okay.
I met her when I was in Japan. As I often say, I dragged her to the States kicking and screaming. She was a banker in Tokyo, didn't want to leave Tokyo. I was a consultant in San Francisco and then Chicago, and we were dating from afar for a while, and eventually she conceded and decided to finally come out to join me in the US. She did, gave up her career as a banker. Um, and I'll be honest, it was not ideal early days for her, for us. It was a difficult transition for her when she first arrived. It was she had 2 winters in Chicago before she had a summer, so that wasn't well planned on my part. I did a little bit of a bait and switch when I said, "Oh yeah, come be with me in San Francisco," and then I moved out to Chicago and said, "Oh, by the way, it's now Chicago," which she thought was basically in the middle of nowhere with no Asian people. Turns out she's come to love Chicago, so much so that I'm having a hard time convincing her to move back to the West Coast. But the initial years were tough. When she first came out here, we struggled in a few respects. I was very busy and focused on work, and she was kind of lacking that kind of ability to kind of focus on work. She did triathlons for a while, but that didn't really kind of truly satisfy her. So before we kind of gave up on each other and our relationship, I suggested we go to therapy, and it turned out to be hugely powerful, both for us together, but also for us individually. Did all sorts of things for me personally. I can go into that if and when you want to, but for her, it also kind of enabled her to understand, kind of how to communicate her feelings, and when she's not happy, ways to communicate that. And ultimately, it was so transformative for her that she ended up deciding that she wanted to become a therapist herself.
Get out of here.
Yeah, so she threw away the iBanker business cards and went back to school at about the age of 40, which is tough to do. Got into Northwestern's program for marriage and family counseling. Went through that, and came out on the other end with a degree in therapy, and now she runs a group practice. So it's been a nice story for me to kind of feel like I've been a bit part of, but also to watch from afar as she's done some really amazing things and helped some individuals in her client work in very profound ways. So anyway, that's a long kind of tangent on Mari, but hard not to include at least some of that along the way. As it relates to children, good news is our marriage got a lot better. We're starting to get excited about having children, but then we were not exactly spring chickens, and turns out that it was harder than we expected to suddenly have children when we were suddenly ready.
Yeah.
So enter IVF, which is something that many people do, but fewer people talk about for some reason. And it too was a little bit challenging. I won't go into all the details, but it took a long time for us to feel like we had a sufficient number of good, viable, fertilized embryos for us to kind of transition into starting to implant them and having trying to have children. And because we had a couple of false starts, and we're starting to feel like oh crap, we might not have children, or we might need to adopt, or find some other plan here. But lo and behold, our first daughter Aya arrived on the scene, and she was and is just amazing. She'll probably interrupt us here at some point during
I
this
hope
session.
so.
She is truly amazing. 3.5 years old, she seems like she's, a young adult in many ways. And then just last year, in March, we had our second daughter, Fumi. So I'm the very proud father of two little girls. And at 48, I'm kind of an old dad, and I've got some issues and concerns and even guilt about waiting so long or being so late to the party. But it's certainly been something that both Mari and I have been very grateful for, to have the two beautiful children that we have.
Well, I'll tell you this. I'm older than the majority of the parents in my community, almost 10 years. Um, I'm a little older than you, and my kids are teenagers now. And I remember, because I coach every sport, and I remember one time that dads were going around the room talking about how old they were when they went to school. When they got to me, they just stared. I just was the old guy in the room.
Right.
And you know what's funny is, after the first time, nobody cared. The first time they were a little surprised, but it didn't change a thing. My kids are still friends with their kids. All those things are fine. The only thing that I realized is I got to stay in shape. So I kept hitting the gym and running and staying active, because that's the only thing that I wasn't going to let happen. I wasn't going to turn into the quote unquote really old guy. And that's the only advice I would pass on to you, is just stay in shape. But other than that, the kids love you just the same. They could care less.
Yeah.
And so you're going to be Superman for a long time with two little girls. I've got, my daughter's 19 and I still wear a cape.
That's great. Well, my 3-year-old she likes to be held, and I am happy to hold her for as long as she'll let me. And an ongoing joke is that when she turns 48, she has to carry me. But in the meantime, I'll be happy to carry her for.
You better get that in writing. So let's talk about that. So when you went through all this, because I know a bit about IVF, I know a bit about some of these items that sometimes you wish you didn't know too much. How did this affect your career and the choices that you were making? Because you were working, obviously hard and traveling and doing what everything happens at LEK, which is everyone is pedal to the metal there. So I'm curious how you balanced all that. And then when you eventually had Aya, I mean, your life must have changed completely.
Well, yes, it did. And it did in multiple ways all at the same time. And it was, it was hard. I feel like I'm kind of a little bit of a broken record here, because I keep saying it was hard. I feel like I've had a very fortunate, and in many ways I'm very, very lucky, but I keep saying it's been hard. So 3.5 years ago, almost right after Aya was born, I was elected to take over the LEK healthcare sector. And at the time I thought, oh yeah, okay, I guess I can do that. The guy that was kind of more or less running it kind of before me basically suggested that I, try to take what I had done in med tech and some of the learnings that I kind of had along the way in terms of team building and kind of, I don't know, culture building, perhaps, try to apply that to the broader healthcare sector. And I was like, okay, that's a little bit more than I had been expecting to take on right now, but if people vote me in, I'll do it. So I put in my ballot, or I put in my hat in the ring, and well, turns out no one else put their hat in the ring. So I guess you could say I was elected, or you could say that no one else put their hat in the ring. But I became the sector head, kind of officially, in January of 2020, 6 months after Aya was born, and 2 months before COVID hit. And it was also the first time LEK had this formal, sector head role that was, with a formal time allocation, a formal, set of responsibilities. Even though it wasn't particularly well codified, it was like, okay, now we're going to make this more official. So I got to be the guinea pig to lead our biggest sector with a 6-month-old, and as COVID was just about to pop its ugly head. So the next 3 years were let's just say a lot of learning, but also I don't think that I could claim that I was the, kind of poster child of, kind of how to be a balanced a balanced husband, father, brother, whatever. I was pretty focused on work, at least up until about 3 months ago, when I decided to not pursue a second term as the healthcare sector head, which was a big decision for me. But I'm very confident and happy in that decision that I made with a couple months of hindsight.
You just encapsulated the whole point of this podcast in those 3 sentences, because the whole impetus from all this was to be yelling from the mountaintops that there is no balance. Stop with thinking that there's this myth that, oh, eventually it all works out. I'm like, it doesn't. There are times that you work your tail off and your family misses you, and there are times you spend a lot of time with your family and your workmates are like, hey, we kind of need you. There's only moments of balance, about 20 minutes worth, and then it moves on to the usual imbalance. And the fact that you've made these choices that you've made with your family intertwined in it, and sometimes it was for them and sometimes it was for work. I mean, it's exactly what we're talking about here. And I love that you feel good about the choice that you made just now. I mean, you're going to find that there are other parts of your life that are going to bring you just as much joy and fulfillment as it was before. It's just, they'll be different things. So in the first few months, is there anything specific that came up or something that you noticed with the time you're spending where you're like, wow, this is a profound difference from what I'm used to?
Yeah, it is profoundly different, but what I don't fully know, Matt, is how much is the cause versus the effect. So it's kind of an interesting, almost like experiment in my own head, trying to figure out, okay, what exactly has changed. I mean, definitely, handing the leadership baton on is probably the single biggest one. I think my personality type is, I have a very hard time letting go or feeling like I'm not doing something that I should be doing. And I had a lot of guilt for the last 3 years that I wasn't doing something. I wasn't, there's always 100 things on my to-do list that I could never, complete. So now my to-do list is, 5 to 10 things, not 100 things. So there's less of that kind of feeling of weight and guilt that I'm not kind of keeping up. So I'm a little bit less on my back foot and a little bit more on my front foot, and that feels good. And I'm also, I think because of that, or at least partially because of that, I'm more present. And that's the thing that I struggled with, for the last 3 years, where my identity was too close to my sector head role, and I had a hard time kind of separating those two, so that on weekends at nighttime I would be thinking about things that about work, about a lot of it was kind of HR and budgets and kind of internal stakeholder alignment and initiatives that needed support or resourcing or direction. And a lot of these things just required a lot of attention or processing that I didn't have like during the day. So I'd often just kind of find myself, at home at the dinner table, not really there. I was thinking about work. So I find myself now with a much more, I hate to use the term balance, but like a more balanced kind of set of responsibilities where I'm
why don't we try diversified as opposed to balanced, where you're in different things. You're still not balanced, bud, but you're diversified.
Fair. but I find that when I am home, I'm more at home and more present. I'm more likely to remember a birthday, or
Yeah.
do something nice for my wife, or bring home a treat for my daughters, from a business trip. Um, or frankly, the other thing that's changed is I'm finding that my even within work, my actions are more intentional, right? So I'm being more selective about, where I'm spending my time. I can't serve every client, so I'm going to focus on those who I enjoy working with. uh,
Yep. I mean,
with the
listen,
people with
you've
the people who I genuinely respect, companies that I think are doing really cool things. So I'm being much more intentional about kind of where and how I spend my time. And when I go on an airplane, there better be a good reason to do so. And unlike my life pre-COVID, when it was just kind of, more meetings is good, full stop. And now I have a different mentality. I'll go visit Bill Hawkins and have a lovely dinner with him, or go have lunch with Rick Anderson and have a great catch up, and that is so worth it. But to like just go to some random client to shake hands and you know have a catch up that isn't really meaningful, that I'm not doing as much anymore. So I'm finding a higher bar for kind of how to fill my time. And I think I'm lucky because I had the opportunity to kind of experience this role where I had a lot of responsibility, a lot of weight on my shoulders, and to be able to kind of have that come off, I now can appreciate my role and what a truly great job I have. I,
I'll tell
I
you
truly get
this.
to work with great clients and great team members, solving really strategic, cool challenges in a space that I really like. And I get paid well. I flew on an airplane, the other day, and the flight attendant brought back a card for me, and it was a happy birthday card, and like, I mean, look, I fly a lot of United miles, so they take care of me. But point is, it's kind of nice to feel special and nice to feel like, appreciated, even if it's from, you know, United flight attendant
Hey,
occasionally.
listen, you
So
take when you can get it. I would say this to you. Um, Kids and marrying the right person, they bring to me the most important piece to the equation next to love, which is perspective. And you start to gain a certain understanding of what you're trying to accomplish in this lifetime because they humanize you. I remember my daughter used to always come to my side of the bed because I'm a morning person at like 5 a.m. and all she would say was one word. And she was like 3 at the time, like yours, and she would say waffle. She just wanted a waffle. And I'm like, you know what? All my work stuff can wait. I'm having waffles. And I don't know if you have something like that where you connect with I about it, but that's just your thing. And we had waffles together every day for a year.
that sounds. And now I definitely want my daughter, or at least one of my daughters, to pop by. I'm just sending my wife a text to see if that might happen in the next few minutes here. But
Okay.
yeah, no, it's you kind of lose the point if you don't kind of enjoy it along the way.
Hey, listen,
And I'm actually finding, like, I've for most of my life been focused on how do I kind of keep moving up, how do I keep progressing, how do I do what I feel like I'm supposed to be doing. And only in the last couple months have I felt like I'm really doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And that's because I'm putting much more focus on family, you know.
well, I think that if you hadn't gone through as you say, all those hard things first, you wouldn't be here. I mean, you needed to climb all those mountains, and it's interesting because you just don't have the advantage of experience. That's one of the things also about being an older dad is you've been around the block. These other dads who are
Right.
25 to 30 that you're going to meet, they don't know anything about anything. You're going to be the smart head in the room at the parent teacher conferences and what have you. It's what happened to me, and I'm sure it's going to happen to you. And it's just funny how they all turn around because they don't know from anything. They haven't experienced anything in life. So where does that leave you now? Meaning, you have this perspective. Do you turn around and sit with people like Sheila and other people that are now emerging into their life? Do you share this stuff, or do you find maybe it's better to let them figure it out on their own and you just act as a resource? Or what do you do with all this newfound information?
Um, it's a good question, and I'm actually actively I'm I'm actively trying to figure out what the best way to do that is, i.e., how do I kind of share my learnings in a more productive, you know, intentional way. So I've started to toy with that on LinkedIn. I've started to venture out on a limb that feels a little bit shaky in terms of sharing things. I think my answer though, Matt, is like what my experience, particularly over the last few years, has shown me is that there is value in being authentic. There's value in it from a professional level, because I think people, they see through bullshit, and they know when you're not being authentic. And at the end of the day, humans are humans, and want to feel connected to other people. And if they're going to be working with a group of people or have leaders that they look up to, they want to feel connected. They want to feel like they trust those people. They want to feel like that those people get it, that they kind of understand the hard moments and the ups and downs. And so I've tried to be very transparent, and as I say a lot, authentic is kind of what I strive to be more than anything. And I think that kind of example that I've somewhat kind of unintentionally been sharing over the last 3 years has helped kind of reinforce a culture of being authentic and open, but also supportive. And it just makes work more fun, right? When you work with people that you trust and that you feel like you're growing the pie and building something together. But I also feel like that authenticity isn't limited to work. It's just a general way of being that I've become more comfortable in. And I'm seeing how there's a direct benefit in a professional context, and maybe even in a leadership context, for true authenticity. And one of the things that I keep kind of wondering about is why do a lot of people kind of call me out and say, oh, you're authentic, and that's so great. I just feel like it's just being authentic. It's not hard. It's just, why aren't more leaders more authentic, is kind of the question.
Well, I think they got there because they didn't share that side of their background. The truth of it is they get there because they can be vulnerable, because they do share, because they do commiserate and empathize and sympathize. Like, one of the things that I read, I always make fun of those memes on Instagram, but there was one that I saw that stuck with me for years, and it goes something like this. What you're dealing with right now and the way that you handle it will act as a blueprint for the next person who sees this, and you're now making their life easier by you going through it first. So all the things that you just said were so hard growing up and going to Japan and dealing with your marriage and dealing with having kids and dealing with these huge career decisions. By having this conversation and by you continuing to share all of your information because you're such a candid guy, you're now providing a blueprint for people who are 15, 20 years younger than you who are making these exact same decisions right now. So there's a huge benefit to this communication.
All right. Well, I'm happy to go along with that, but I guess part of part of my response would be, well, why did I wait till 47, 48 years to do this?
It wasn't your time yet. Now it
Yeah.
is.
And maybe that's it, but maybe that's it. But I think some of my wisdom now would have helped me 20 years ago too,
Well, certainly.
in terms of smelling the roses. And if you do get a chance to travel around the world for a few months, don't do it to like check off boxes and be able to show off how many countries you've been to on Instagram. Do it because you know.
Did you ever see the snow monkeys in Japan?
I did. Yeah.
What was that like? I've heard that it's extraordinary. Or
Yeah.
not so much.
I think the gorillas in the Congo are more extraordinary.
Is that right?
If I had to choose, yeah.
Awesome.
They're a little bit more human-like.
Yeah, I'll bet. Well, look, you've been every bit of what I expected on this, and I think that the people who know you are going to love seeing this, and the ones who don't know you are going to appreciate you being this genuine, because it's hard, to open up and talk about things that are sensitive, and instead you just embrace them, which is what makes it feel human. And that's always the goal here, is to make sure that I normalize people going through these huge careers along with these giant family decisions and doing it together.
Yeah.
And so with that, is your wife or daughter almost there, or do we want to do that another time?
Let's see.
See if she's out there. I'll say hello.
Hey, Aya, come here. Aya, come here. I think she's busy. She's got more important things to do.
All right, well then we'll get her next time. Well, listen, man, thank you for doing this. I knew we met in a very funny situation. We just sat together at a conference, just trying to eat lunch, not really looking to socialize, and yet that's just the kind of person that you are that was immediately drawn to you. And then I'd already interviewed Sheila, so it was just a funny coincidence. Uh-oh, do we have another? Hey.
Look who's there. Say hi.
Hello,
Hi.
Aya. What's happening?
You say hi one more time. You
Yeah.
say hi to Matt.
Hi.
Can I ask you one question?
Yeah.
All right. What is your favorite part about your dad?
Playing.
Playing.
He plays.
Oh.
What does he play with you?
Bracelet.
Bracelet. I play bracelet.
He's into arts and crafts. That's awesome. What does he call you? A nickname, or does he call you Aya?
What do I call you?
I don't know.
Yes, I do. What do I call you? Do I call you a monkey?
Yeah.
Yeah. What about a goose? Do I call you a
Yeah.
goose? Do I call you a funny goose?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Monkey
awesome.
and goose are her nicknames. What do you
That-
think? A monkey or a goose? I think she's a little bit of a goose. Are you a monkey or a goose?
Yeah. Aya, you are a very lucky person. I will tell you that right now. So I want to say thank you for coming on. It was nice meeting you. And I want to say thank you to your dad for being such a good guy. So
Thanks, Matt.
You're
Always,
welcome.
always a pleasure to hang out with you and talk. So
Yeah, absolutely. This has been The Family Business, where we talk about how families and careers intertwine. Jonas Funk has been a sensational guest, as well as Aya. Thanks so much for being on.
bye-bye.
See you guys. Bye, Aya.
Yeah.